We're going to start in just a few minutes. We have a few senators and House members that are on Senate time. Here's one of them. Come in and join us. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this joint meeting of the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Subcommittee of the House Legislative Oversight Committee with the Senate Corrections and Penology Subcommittee. This is a long statement here. Reviewing the Legislative Audit Council report on DJJ. With us today, we have Senator McLeod from Richland County, and she's not here yet, but she's on her way and she's listening until she gets here. Senator Harpootlian is not here. He may come in a little bit later. He had a family issue he had to take care of this morning. We have Senator Adams from Berkeley County and Senator Johnson from York County. Also with us, we have Representative Wooten from Lexington County, who chairs the House Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Subcommittee, Representative McCravey from Greenwood County, Representative Manginson, he's from Spartanburg County. He hasn't arrived yet, but I'm assuming he'll be here shortly, and Representative Johnson from Clarendon County. Thank y'all all for being with us. The Senate Corrections Subcommittee was appointed by Chairman Martin and tasked with reviewing the LAC report on DJJ and making recommendations for consideration by the full Corrections Committee. Our subcommittee has met once on April 21st to receive an overview of the findings and recommendations by the Legislative Audit Council. Last night I was with someone that said, Senator Shealy, you know, you're not always politically correct. I said, yeah, you're right, I'm not. What I try to do is be correct. And what I want to do is for us to work to be correct and correct the problems that we find at the Department of Juvenile Justice and correct the children and help the children of South Carolina who don't have a voice, and also the employees that are working there who don't have somebody to speak for them, and make sure that they are taken care of. And that's the job that we are tasked with, and that's what I want us to do. So I look forward to working with all of you, working with the LAC, and finding what we need to do to correct what's the problems that they are currently there. If there are no problems, we'll move from there, but whatever needs to be done, we want to move forward and see what we can do to straighten that out. The purpose of today's hearing is to finish reviewing the audit. Representative Wooten and I agreed this could be done more effectively through a joint meeting of both our subcommittees to receive this information at one time. Staff has also reported a document titled the 2021 LAC Audit of DJJ, Findings and Recommendations Summary, which is in your notebooks, and this might help you keep on track this morning. With that, I'll welcome back Director Earl Powell, Deputy Director Marsha Lindsay, and we're going to let Deputy Director Lindsay start. I think she wants to go through the exit process first and when we go through this, let's don't ask questions until we last time we got a little off track because everybody got so excited. We wanted to butt in and ask questions during everything, so we didn't finish. But what we'd like to do is, if you have any questions, let's wait till the end of a section, or let's do a more skim over, because we know there are a lot of issues. But what we want to do is just skim over the report. She's going to start with the exit process, but let's skim over the report and then kind of have our discussion so we don't get bogged down in the minutia, and because there's a lot of issues you're going to get angry about when you hear them, but we can't solve them issue by issue during this report. Let's let them talk, and then we'll butt in as needed at the end. How about that? Is everybody good with that? Okay.
Thank you, Senator. I do want to introduce our team again for those who didn't know or were not here last time. Yolanda Wardlaw, she's a senior auditor. She and I both were on the previous DJJ audit. This is Jordan Neese, Ian Day, and Stephen Noel, and we had one other auditor who's not here today. I appreciate you indulging me a few minutes to talk about the exit process. I would like to briefly describe it because there have been some comments made by DJJ in the press about us not considering the information they provided to us, and by them being limited to 10 pages that were appended to our report. We have a standard protocol that we follow for every single agency that we audit. We go over a list of exit procedures with the director, which we did in this case as well, asking if they have any questions about the procedure. Every agency is given 10 working days to provide written comments to the preliminary draft report. So they get the preliminary draft, they have 10 working days to give us any comments, any length of comments they want to provide. But we tell them that, there's two types of comments that typically agencies make: differences in fact and differences in conclusions. For the differences in fact, we ask the agency to provide supporting documentation or evidence for what it's asking us to change in the report. The reason we ask for this is because everything that is currently in our report is supported by evidence. So the agency must provide something that contradicts the evidence already collected throughout our audit process. And it's accurate that DJJ did provide us 703 pages for our review. Each auditor here, plus the other one who's not here today, reviewed anything that had to do with their areas of the audit. And I personally read all 703 pages. DJJ basically provided very little actual documentation and or evidence that warranted changes to our report. We considered every single page that they provided, and instead the agency disagreed that we observed certain things or the staff had indeed told us certain things. And the agency does talk a good bit about initiatives that they've started or new processes that they're in the process of starting or in the process of implementing. That is something that normally an agency will put in their final comments, because we can't verify it if they don't provide proper documentation. And if it's a new process that say, we're implementing this because it's going to fix this, we have no way of knowing that. So we let them say that in their final comments. That's not something that, because our field work is already ended, that we can go back. Our report reflects what processes the agency utilized while we were conducting the audit. And our samples, each of the samples in the report, note the time frame of when we looked at each thing. The other differences are differences in conclusions, and we believe that our conclusions are sufficient and appropriate to make based on the evidence that we did collect. The agency did not provide documentation that would change what we concluded in the report. And just to note, all of our council members that we report to were emailed all 703 pages of DJJ's preliminary response to ensure that they also were comfortable with what we had in the report. Lastly, all agencies are given 10 pages for final comments. That is our standard protocol, and it always has been. This report is not the longest report that I've managed, and it's not nearly as long as the longest report that we've put out as an agency. DJJ report is 151 pages, not counting the survey results, and there were 101 recommendations. By comparison, in 2019, when we audited the Department of Corrections, that was a 173-page report with 106 recommendations, and SCDC's response was 2 pages. And the biggest report that we ever put out, which I hope we will never have one this big again, was the Department of Transportation in 2016. It was 308 pages long and had 172 recommendations, and DOT's response was 10 pages and a little bit on the 11th page. It should be noted also that DOT did not ask for additional pages. So we handle DJJ the same exact way that we handle every other agency that we audit, and I just kind of wanted to make that clear.
I'll talk to you.
All right.
Have a good Wednesday.
You too, Bella.
Okay, there's another conversation going on. That's all I want to say about the exit process, and if y'all have any questions about that. All right.
When you said you met with the director, did you meet with the director himself or a subordinate?
Yes, the director himself.
So you explained that entire process to
Yes,
him?
sir, I did.
He acted like he understood that
He
process?
said he understood it, yes, sir. And I want to mention, Senator Johnson, that you had asked about response rates for surveys. I did a little Googling, and anything higher than 50% is considered an excellent response rate. And this was 60-ish percent, as was the last one for DJJ. It just goes to show that the folks wanted to express themselves. So, we talked a good bit about security and safety last time, and I'm just going to kind of pick up toward the end of that chapter, if that's okay with you. In fact, I think that we were talking about referral of criminal cases to solicitors, and we said that DJJ's process for referring criminal cases was unclear, and there were insufficient standards for that.
Do you remember what page we were left
This
on?
is on page 24 that I'm talking about right now.
I'm just trying to catch them up.
We interviewed the solicitors that were in the areas where the facilities are located, and one solicitor did indicate that he had heard about some significant incidents that occurred at a DJJ facility through a third party. And that's how he found out about it, and DJJ did not notify him of this major incident. Other solicitors we interviewed stated that they are not aware of what standards DJJ has for referring incidents to them, or that the standards are inconsistent. We talk a little bit about the probable cause deal, where it's something that only SLED does. That solicitors noted that SLED sends everything to them for probable cause determination, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I have 2 attorneys here on the team, and one solicitor raised concerns about issuing a probable cause determination before the agency has ever initiated a proceeding. That may raise ethics issues regarding legal advice, and it can be very time-consuming. So we talked about that. We talked about the performance-based standards and the event reporting system reconciliation, and we said that that process is insufficient. The PBS are the serious incidents, and Ian, you can describe this better if you feel you need to. And we found that when the PBS staff they do have access to the ERS, the event reporting system, but what happens is they don't have access to other relevant parts of an incident, such as the video camera footage, to make decisions based on that. So we're saying that that should be corrected so they have access to all the information that they might need. Going on, we have violations of security procedures. DJJ does have its own quality assurance review process, but what we found is that DJJ found in itself a lot of failure in the different secure facilities in a lot of different categories, either limited compliance or failed compliance. At BRC, the quality assurance review folks showed that RRC failed to complete the necessary documentation for isolation room confinement of more than 4 hours. And as y'all may recall, the U.S. Department of Justice had issues with DJJ's use of isolation. So that was another thing that they had found. What we had a big problem with was the agency's failure to address findings and recommendations. Once they found issues, the facility is supposed to complete a corrective action plan of how they plan to address the deficiencies. And what we found in several different cases is that they were supposed to do that, they didn't do it, and over a certain amount of time, they just closed the case with no action was taken. So the deficiencies either were not corrected or the agency does not know whether or not the deficiencies were corrected because they just waited a certain standard amount of time and then closed the case. So obviously, that's a problem. Another thing that we found, and I have to say we looked at it, and we noted it before the Department of Justice did, but the inadequate camera surveillance. There are a lot of blind spots in the secure facilities, and the video retention procedures don't require sufficient time for the footage to be saved, for reviews and investigations and things of that nature. We found 22 different instances of insufficient camera surveillance at the secure facilities. DJJ had requested money for this, and it had not been granted by the General Assembly, by you guys. And they were requesting money again this year, in this year's budget. But after they got our preliminary draft, it could be a coincidence. We have in here about the amount of carry-forward funds that they have that they could have used to secure a new camera system. So they withdrew that part of the request. Moving on, we talk about raise the age implementation, and we said that DJJ did not adequately prepare for the increase in juveniles from the Raise the Age Act implementation. Really, they made very little effort to increase recruitment efforts to fill vacant JCOs. They asked for 567 additional FTEs in 1 year, and then 348 additional FTEs in another year, which seemed a little outrageous, the number. They did not have a formal written plan for implementation. They did not develop a housing plan for where the older juveniles would be housed. And they do have this thing called Youth in Transition Program to assist older juveniles, but it wasn't fully implemented until May 2020, which is almost a full year after the July 1, 2019 date when they would be getting the older juveniles. Let's see. We have some numbers and some graphs, and shows the average daily populations and the Raise the Age average daily population. I think DJJ had some concerns about some of those numbers, but these numbers came from them. So, I'm saying that we did the best that we could to eliminate duplicates that were provided to us. And we, two different graphs, one showing the number of RTA admissions at the different secure facilities. And when we got that initial, that was Jordan's area, when we got that initial data list, it didn't look right. It was just a whole bunch of duplicates and things. And so she went back to them and tried to figure out what was going on, and we did eliminate those duplicates. But there were, obviously, juveniles may be admitted to more than one facility during a year, so those would still exist. We tried our best to make the numbers as accurate as possible. That's really all in Chapter 2, looking from the balcony and not getting down in the weeds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, my life has gone awry because I watched the first hearing while running on the treadmill, and so I've gone from inspirational stuff to watching this, so we can tell that my life has really gone to the dumpster. But the PBS and the ERS seem like two different systems
They
to
are.
which enter. So if multiple staff are entering the same info to two different systems, is there a way to streamline that?
Well, it's two different. The ERS is for any event that happens. It could be anything from an assault to somebody, I think the example we used last time was losing their keys on
Right.
campus. The PBS is more addressing incidents of serious nature that have to do with attacks or, things of that nature, or
Yes.
Ian, if you wanted, this was
So,
Ian's area.
The ERS system does capture any type of thing that might happen at any DJJ facility or really have to do with DJJ staff. And that is used within the Inspector General's office and for investigation purposes. PBS is another program within the agency that's focused on the secure facilities and capturing kind of a snapshot through data of the conditions of confinement and sort of what's happening. So they only look at certain things. We focused on the data they capture that has to do with more what we saw as serious incidents.
What is
but
there-
they are separate. But
I see that, but just from a streamlining standpoint, is there any reason the instance can't be maintained all in one central location for analysis and be able to extract that data from one system and just
Well,
have one
everything
person?
is in ERS to start with.
yes.
Okay.
So PBS is just rising up the things that are of more importance.
Yeah, it's a sort of a subset of it, but they do have this. PBS relies significantly on reviewing ERS, so it's not necessarily duplicative, but it is because PBS focuses a little bit on a subset of things within ERS. But within that subset, there is an opportunity to reconcile and make sure that everything is correct between the two, and we think that's the opportunity that we noticed.
So to answer your question, probably not. It's probably both are needed, would be my assessment. Magnuson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for all of your work and everybody that's put so much effort into this. I guess my question deals with when you talked about the violations of security procedures, and you mentioned that there was carry forward funding that could have been used. What was the recommendations at that time that could have been used for? Was that, you said, security cameras primarily?
That's the one that we made, yes, sir. We basically presented the carry forward information, and then within the text of the report, we said that the surveillance cameras could be something because it's non-recurring funds, and so it has to be like a one-time purchase. And so that would fall very much appropriately into that category.
And that was the single thing that was.
We didn't
that
make
money
that
would've-
recommendation, it's in the report, though.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. That youth in transition housing, is that on Shivers Road? Is that where that is, or do you know where that is?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's, the Youth in Transition is more of a program
It's a
than the
program,
housing.
it's not housing.
It's a program to,
Okay, because
for
there's
life
been
skills
talk
and
that they
such
were
of
going to
that.
have housing for youth in transition. I just wondered if they did that. Okay. Okay, go ahead. Proceed.
All righty, thank you. We're entering Chapter 3, Human Resources. In this chapter, we talk about employee compensation, and we found that DJJ is not appropriately paid essential security staff. What we did to address this issue is compare the agency-wide classification and compensation information from October 2016, which was prior to this administration, with information from September 2019 and September 2020. We found that the largest job classes, which does include the juvenile correctional officers, or JCOs, you'll hear me refer to them as JCOs, human services specialists and coordinators in the community, and certified teachers, have smaller average increases in salary than several management job classes that have fewer employees. We put a fact in here, and what we were trying to say was that when DJJ did have some money that it could spend on salaries, it spent it on folks other than the frontline critical needs positions. We were not implying that they should have done this. This was just something that we brought to light to show how much money they had. We found that the additional funding spent on the top 10 classes receiving the highest average salary increases was enough to give all 113 entry-level correctional officers a 14% raise. So there was money, and they spent it elsewhere, is what our main, what we're trying to get across. We have some tables in Chapter 3 that show what the percentage increases were for some of these job classes, and it shows that the percentage increase on page 39 for correctional officers 1 was 5%. From 2016 to 2020. DJJ has requested additional funding, and they have received, $1 million or so in FY 19-20. So they have requested it, but there again, our point was when they had some money, they spent it on other jobs other than these JCOs, which are, if you don't have security, I'll say this, and I'll probably say it again, if you don't have the security in place, everything else kind of falls apart and can't be done correctly. So it's very important to spend the money that they have in the best way possible. They've lost 159 correctional officer and law enforcement officer positions since October 2016, and that's as of September 2020. We have a table on page 41 that shows those net gains or net losses. We talk about dual employment. What they do currently is acceptable at the Division of State Human Resources, and what they do is write down net hours worked. But that does not show whether or not there's overlapping hours. In other words, if you have dual employment at an agency, you're supposed to work 8 to 3 at your primary job and 3 to 6 at your dual employment job. And if you just say, I worked 20 hours this week, you don't know if and in these cases, the majority of these folks are tutors, and they're also teachers, so you don't know if they're tutoring on teaching time, basically. So we're saying it's a better practice. It's an allowable practice, what they do, but it's a better practice to have the start and end times for each of your 2 jobs at the agency. We looked at DJJ supervisors, and we looked at a judgmental sample of HR files for employees earning $80,000 or more as of September 30th, 2019. And we looked at it for a couple of different reasons, and basically what we found was that supervisors are not receiving evaluations consistently. Their position descriptions are not regularly updated and don't include accurate descriptions of the jobs. They don't maintain evidence of all educational qualifications. And we also noted that 2 members of the EMT, which is the executive management team, were hired from outside the agency into temporary positions, and then months after they were moved over to full-time positions, which bypassed a formal interview and job posting process. There again, it's acceptable for deputy director positions to do that, but it is a best practice always to have a better recruitment time to get to find out who is the best for those particular positions, the most qualified for those. What I was stumbling to say is that maximizes recruitment and selection opportunities. We looked at employee progressive discipline, and we found that the offenses in their discipline policy are not well-defined. Suspensions were not timely for employees who were ultimately terminated. And we found that DJJ is relying on officers with multiple disciplinary actions, demonstrating a history of reckless or indifferent behavior towards juvenile safety to maintain security at its facilities. We have a table on page 53 where it shows that just one employee in our sample had 10 times he failed to carry out, he or she, I don't know, failed to carry out job responsibilities, and 6 additional times was found sleeping on duty. And these are offenses where after 3 or more times, they were supposed to be terminated from their positions. As of 2020, September 2020, all of these employees except for one were still employed by DJJ. We go on and talk about recruitment and retention. We feel like that they could improve their recruitment and retention efforts. They didn't hire recruiters until June of 2020, when they've had issues with vacant FTEs for years. We found that the recruitment goals were kind of vague and didn't have specificity, and thought that they could do a better job at that. They're not tracking which bonuses are the most effective. They have implemented some bonuses, sign-on bonuses and referral bonuses and things of that nature, but in order to see which ones are working for you, you need to track it. We looked at a sample of HR files for JCOs to look at the hiring process, because we heard from a lot of folks that it takes forever to hire somebody on. And we found that the average time from HR receiving an application to an interview was about a month. And then the average time from an interview to the hire date is 55 days. So a couple more months. So it's about 3 months to bring in an entry-level JCO. We also found that there's a lot of duplication in the process, especially for this job posting is a continuous job posting, because they definitely need more JCOs. And so the whole process can be streamlined. The agency said that, I believe that it's gotten a new system to do that, but we don't know anything about the system, and I don't think it's been implemented, or if it has, it's been implemented since we had finalized our field work. And in some cases, well, in all cases, these entry-level positions were requiring some level of senior leadership sign-off, and some of them went as high as the director's office. And we were never given a good reason for that, exactly. So you're hiring someone to be a JCO, you have to have your high school diploma or GED, pass a criminal background check, and a drug test. So we didn't know why the senior deputy or the director of the agency would have to be involved in proving these people to be hired. It's just added more time to the process. We looked at the hiring qualifications and salaries and compared DJJ to other entities. We compared them to the other southeastern states, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. And we also compared them, I'm on page 61, we also compared them to local law enforcement in the counties where the DJJ facilities are located. And it is true that the JCO entry-level salary is about $2,600 less than the beginning salary of an SCDC security officer. What we really gleaned from this, or I did, is that other states like Florida and North Carolina are pre-testing these applicants to see if they're suitable for this type of position, because we heard that a lot of folks start and go, I'm not going to have these kids cussing at me and whatever, and they don't want to work there, and then they quit. So if you try to get that on the beginning end a little bit and give these suitability tests, or at least one, DJJ doesn't do any of those, then that might help them get a better fit from the beginning. We looked at job fairs. Senator Harpootlian asked me something that they had done good or well, and they did extend recruitment efforts to outside of Columbia for the upstate and the coastal evaluation centers. So we did find that were doing that better. But we do have some recommendations here for how to get more bang for your buck from the job fairs and track the cost and make sure that the ones that you're participating in are the best ones for you. On page 67, we had this in the last audit. We talk about the retirement system eligibility. All of our recommendations in this finding are to the General Assembly and not to DJJ, because we're thinking that there needs to be some change to the law. What the deal is now is at DJJ, everybody that they hire, they put in PORS, the police officers' retirement system. Everybody. There's a state law that allows DMH and SCDC and DJJ to do that. However, in our opinion, if these folks are not working in any capacity as a peace officer, which is really what it's supposed to be, then they shouldn't get the benefit of the PORS when you have local law enforcement and things like that. When they move from, being on the front line to maybe an administrative job, they lose their PORS eligibility. And when we talked about this last time, all the administrative staff was behind the fence at BRRC, and they have since moved all the administrative staff to headquarters off of Bush River Road. And they have not notified PIBA of that when they were talking with PIBA back and forth about what they wanted to do as far as categorizing all their folks and putting all of them in PORS. So we're wanting PIBA. We are recommending that the General Assembly maybe better clarify what it considers a peace officer, because, they have their procurement folks, their finance folks, all these folks who don't work behind the fence and don't work at a secure facility. I mean, under this category, everybody on my team could be in PORS, because we were out there at the secure facilities a lot. So that's just something for consideration there. That's chapter 3. Any questions?
Thank you. You raised a number of points that I took notes on, and trying to get back to it. With regard to salaries, who sets the salaries for DJJ employees?
Well, they follow the state compensation classification.
Okay, but the salary is set by DJJ's, I guess, director and management.
Right, through asking, I guess, through their budget request for more money to increase salaries. That would be the case, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the reason that I'm asking is because I recently participated in a different legislative meeting and heard directly from the director that those salaries are not set by the agency. And I had questions about that, although I didn't ask those questions at that time. I wanted to wait and see what, or hear what is actually being.
Do you have anything to add to that? Well, we didn't get into that about who specifically sets it, but it's been my experience in other audits and other agencies that, like at SCDC, they would go to the General Assembly and ask for some more funding. And I don't know what other things that they did, but they eventually raised the salaries of their entry-level security officers.
Okay, and you talked about the process, I think, for hiring JCOs, is it in alignment with what other states typically, with the amount of time that other states typically take to hire JCOs, or is it much longer?
The main reason that we looked at it were because of the staff's complaints about it taking so long. I do know that it's a hard position to fill. It is. And I can compare it, and I hate to keep comparing it to SCDC, but I did that audit too. But in those cases, they have gotten the time down by doing some streamlining and eliminating certain duplicative efforts to make it a shorter time frame. We didn't I looked specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong, about other states and how many days it took. No. But we had a lot of comments from DJJ staff of one of the concerns was it was taking so long. And so we wanted to look at the process and see why.
Okay. I also have another question, because did I understand you correctly when you talked about salary increases? You said that basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically they are top-heavy in terms of the increases.
I didn't say that, but that's what it kind of looks like in our chart.
And top-down, basically. The top tier at DJJ
That's
gets
why we
the
looked at
increases.
certain categories. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that may explain, I didn't hear you talk about this today, but based on the emails and the concerns that I've gotten from constituents and community members who are employed at DJJ, that I would imagine probably contributes to the low morale that has.
We got some responses definitely in our survey as well, where they felt like upper management was getting raises and they were being told, we don't have money for y'all to get a raise. So that was through our survey responses, a lot of that.
Okay, but you said, and I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but you said that they did in fact have the funding to provide raises to those at other levels.
Well, I'm saying that they used the money that they had that was recurring funds. This is how they used it, as opposed to using it more toward the frontline security folks. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
I just got some clarification from state HR, and they have a range, and once we give them the allocation, whether it's $1 million or $10 million, then once we give them the $10 million, then the agency decides where they put that money. So they can give it to upper-level management, or they can give it to the frontline workers. The agency makes that decision. So they made the decision to give it to the upper-level management instead of the frontline workers. So that's not the legislature's decision. We give the money, but then they decide where to put it, in answer to your question. And I just got that from accounting. So if y'all want to argue with Senator Leatherman, that works for me.
I'm not arguing at all. That's right.
Not you. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the agency. If they want to argue with Senator Leatherman, I'm not. Okay. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You mentioned you had 6 employees on your chart on page 53 that had all been written up for numerous offenses, and you said that all the employees were still employed except one.
Yes,
Do
sir.
you know if that one was terminated, or did they just leave on their own?
Do you know, Jordan?
Okay. Is there I don't know, is there a way at this point to figure that out? I'll ask the director.
You can ask the agency. They should
I can
know.
ask the agency. When,
And that was as of September 2020.
and we've lost 155 correctional officers since 2016.
159, yes, sir.
159? All right, if you add the law enforcement, all right, yeah. So I get the salaries are low, and that can be an issue, but when you compare it to some of the counties that they're in, they're actually higher.
Higher, yes, sir.
Some they're lower, some they're higher. During your audit, did they give you any indication as why they had chosen to give significant pay raises to upper management or other positions and not in the position that they were losing the most people. Did they explain that at all?
No, sir. And I think too, when people say, well, these people may have deserved raises, and that's true too. We didn't look at it, we're just reporting the facts of where the money went.
But you also, and you've said this, that nothing out there works
Except
if people aren't
until
safe.
you have security
You
set.
don't have security.
Right.
You don't have education opportunities, you don't have
Medical.
vocational training, you don't have medical, you have
Yes.
nothing if they don't have that.
Correct.
And you have found that they just simply don't have that, correct? They do not have enough.
It is not sufficient. No, sir.
Representative Magnuson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following up a little bit on what Senator McLeod said and some of what Senator Johnson, I'm looking on page 42, and it looks like for the security staff, not only did they not get a raise, but their pay actually went down from September of 2019 to September of 2020. Did DJJ give any reason for the decrease in the salary for their security staff?
No, sir.
Is that something that you all looked
That
into?
would be a good
or-
question
I
for
guess
them.
it would be a good question for them. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative McCravy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It says DJJ came back with a letter, and I'm just reading from their letter, that they claim they transitioned from a paper-based hiring process to an automated system effective September 1st, 2020, which has now streamlined their hiring process. Is that something you've been made aware of, or has that changed the 2 or 3 month time period?
They said that in their comments, but we had already concluded our field work at that point. That's what I was saying. Most of the time, agencies, when they've implemented a new process or a new initiative, they'll just say that in their final comments. It's not something that we can document and say, yes, they've implemented this, and yes, it's streamlined. We would have to go back out and do a whole nother sampling of the way we did it this time to determine how many days. So I definitely hope that it does streamline the hiring process, but it's not something we can verify because of when it happened in our audit. It happened after we completed field work. And so that's something that, like I said, normally an agency will just respond in their final comments that that's something they've done. So that's great because it means that hopefully our audit has been impactful already in making those changes.
Okay, Representative Wooten.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've asked staff to see if we can get the criteria for Officer 1 through 4, just so we can kind of know what the criteria is to progress and move them forward. So we won't worry about that. But I saw that Correctional Officer 2 is leaving faster than any other category or level, and I'm kind of wondering why, if you have reasons for that. But and the second, to follow up on that, was there any commonality to who was managing level 2, and was it a management issue that they may have been leaving because of who was managing them? That kind of concerns me too. So is there any indication of why the 2s are leaving, or is it the folks that say, I've been here 10 years, if I'm either going to stay or I got to get out now? Is it that,
We don't have that in the report, so we didn't ask those reasons of why they were leaving. But I know that a JCO is usually a JCO 1 for about a year, correct me if I'm wrong, and then they automatically or are normally promoted to JCO 2. And so they're supposed to get a raise, I think, at that point. Am I right on that? This is not in the report, so
Okay.
I'm just trying to give you some fill in a little bit. But no, sir, we didn't ask specifically why they were leaving. I know generally in the survey, people talked about just not feeling safe and nothing had changed. They had given it a time, a year or two, and then nothing had changed. And so maybe they just left for that. I don't know.
Okay.
That would be a great question for the agency to see if they're doing, because I don't believe they're doing exit interviews, because I know they don't know whether or not people are going to other law enforcement agencies, because we talk about that, not recouping funds for training for law enforcement officers, excuse me. So that would be a great thing maybe to do in an exit interview we look at that a lot of times, and not a lot of state agencies do exit interviews, but you can glean a lot of information from that to help you with your current staff, just to maybe head that off so they won't leave.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like Senator McLeod, I've spent some time in another legislative meeting as well as making a few calls on behalf of constituents. And I don't know that it's factual, but I was told that the JCO 1, you're coming in at about 28 to 32,000, and that the recommendation, I think you mentioned it as well, every entry-level person could have been given 14%, a 14% raise. And I was just told that when the JCO 1 got their raise, it put them where the JCO 2 was, but that there was not enough
The compression peg.
to go all the way up to entry level, which is JCO 4.
Right.
And so what they found were that the employees, the JCO 1s, would stay a year to a year and a half and then go to another state agency and be more competitive in salary, because you went from 28 to 32 to about 34, 36. So they found they were losing the bottom end. Now, I'm not saying that's a justification to give raises at the top, but that is.
I think an agency always has to be concerned with, if they give entry-level, brand-new folks money, it's got to trickle up to the other folks, because it's not fair. I can't imagine working someplace 6 years and somebody comes in and is making the same as me. We're not saying that. We're just talking about generally that they need to have more security officers. And one thing that was mentioned throughout is the rate of pay. Even though you're right to point out, I can't remember who pointed out, that some of the counties pay less than, what DJJ pays. So.
I think that, were you through with your, I think that 14% was more like a comparison.
just to
It was
show
not an
that that's not-
actual
it was not
number.
an
And I
actual.
think that they could have actually said, let's say, instead of giving the management 30% raises, they could have given 5% raises
That's all it
across
was.
the board of the JCOs. I mean, if I was a JCO and I was like a JCO 3, or, well, I don't know what the levels are, and I got 5%, I would have been excited about that, not 14% at the entry level. But if I'd been there for 10 years and just got a little bit, instead of upper level management getting a 30% raise, if I'd just gotten a little bit, like state employees getting a 2% raise, that they're thankful for that. But these people are getting in the Koger building down there that's not even behind the fence. They're getting big raises, and the ones that are out there fighting in the trenches, they're getting nothing. So I think that's the point there.
That was the whole
not
point.
the 14%.
No, we were not
That's just
saying
a
to do that.
number.
Right.
I think y'all took the amount and made it a number with the number of employees.
Right.
But they could have given everybody a raise, just maybe 5%
Our
or 3%.
point was there was funding available, and they
Right.
chose to use
I
it
think
the way they did.
that was the idea. You just
That
took
was
the
their
number
whole
and
point.
divided it.
Right.
Not 14% was just
No.
a pull
No,
it
no,
out
no,
of the sky
no.
number.
That's our whole point, was to show that they had money to use, and they used it a different way than trying to
Yeah,
help
so-
the
So
frontline employees.
don't marry
get stuck
yourself
on
to
that
the 14%.
14%.
The 14% was just a number. Okay, and Senator McLeod has a question.
I just want to follow up on something I think I heard you say on my way in, and that was that the agency requested, I don't remember the exact number of FTEs, but it seemed like an
It was huge,
astronomical
500
number.
and something in there.
Yeah,
For the
500
raise
and
the
then
age.
300. Okay, so can you expound on that a little bit? Like, were those FTEs granted or given to the agency?
No, ma'am, they weren't funded.
Okay, were any of them, what is a normal request when it comes to FTEs?
I don't know that there is a normal request. That would be a good question for the agency, of why they asked for that many FTEs.
Okay, do you know what their justification?
They didn't have much of a justification. Jordan, that was yours.
It was just an anticipation of the raise the age implementation.
That there would be more juveniles.
Probably not 500 juveniles. One FTE for each juvenile.
And our whole point was that they should have been doing more to recruit JCOs along the way anyway. And I don't know that they were all JCOs, but they were, like, it was a pretty astronomical number they were requesting.
So you said, too, that you were following up to Senator Harpootlian's question about what they did well. And you mentioned, I think, a few minutes ago that the job fairs were,
They were holding job fairs outside of Columbia, but I think their focus used to be just Columbia, and it wasn't very helpful to the upstate or the coastal evaluation centers, to try to get folks interested in those areas. So they have started having more job fairs in those particular areas, not just Columbia.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Johnson.
So I've read their response, DJJ's response to you, and I'm trying to just go through a couple of things and just figure out. You stated, or your report states too, talking about deputy directors, that 2 individuals were already DJJ employees who were moved in temporary positions and promoted.
Right.
They literally say on page 4 of their report that that's not true.
Right, but we have the HR files and we follow the action forms paths of what exactly happened, and that's what exactly happened on paper. And we know that a couple of these, I know one of them personally, she's been there for years, one of the deputy directors that we're talking about. So I know she was already there. So I'm not sure who the other one is, but
How did they give you any supporting documentation for their assertion that what you proved in the personnel files didn't happen?
no,
I mean, how did they, I mean, it's
no, sir.
almost like you walk into me and say, well, the sky is blue, and I go, oh, no, it's not today, it's cloudy, and we start arguing, and, I mean,
It can be very frustrating to address agency comments when they're saying something which is just opposed to exactly what we've said in the report, but they don't provide, they did not provide documentation to contradict. That's what I was saying earlier. That's what had been bothering me about what they were saying about us, not considering everything they provided.
and in the documentation you have, it is crystal clear that they were already there, and they moved into a temporary position, all right. Thank you.
Our bigger concern was the 2 that they hired from outside.
I guess my concern is that I have a report from DJJ that says, well, these things aren't true, when they are. They're documented truths. And
Correct.
so it brings their entire response and makes me question if any part of their response is correct.
Representative Wooten.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there particular data that we could track that would help us see if the agency is making improvements in areas noted in the report? And if so, can you provide us with that list of?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
So I guess, I mean, there's a lot going on
Yes,
here.
sir.
So,
There are a lot of moving parts at DJJ.
right. So I guess let me think about how I should rephrase this for a minute. Let's
Okay.
I want to, we got to have something that we can see if they're doing anything before we meet with them to continue this conversation. So I'll get back with it. We'll provide,
I think what you're asking is, since this report, can we track?
anything
Have
they've
they
done.
done? I think
since
that's
this-
that's what we're going to have to ask the agency when we bring their people in here to ask them those
And
questions.
remember, saying it so doesn't make it so.
Right.
Right.
Just because they tell us that doesn't mean it's really true. What we're going to do is, we're going to plan some road trips. We're going on a road trip.
Road trip. Field trip.
And I would also request that you look at the specific times that we looked at. All of that is documented. It's clear. It's clearly documented. So if they say, I noticed
Y'all want
about
road
7
trips?
or 8 times in their final response, they talk about, we will implement, we have implemented, we're starting to, words like that. That's very recent or futuristic. And that's great if they're making those changes, and I hope that they're making those changes. But those changes had not been implemented when we did our review.
Okay, we just found out some more information if y'all would like to know this. This is from Finance. We can't designate where funding to agency goes, like specifically for JCOs. We are giving $4,565,582 for JCOs this year. It rolls up in their budget, but it's designated for JCOs. That's a lot of money for JCOs. Now, let's see if they get it. But
We will be doing, most likely, if we have the staff available, a follow-up audit in 18 to 24 months. That's how this audit got started, was as a follow-up. And then Representatives Gilliam and Moss headed up a new request. And so if we have the staff available, and this is such an important agency, and when I was talking with Mr. Powell about it, and I said, we've got to go back and follow up on DJJ because we've had a lot of funding last time, and it's a vulnerable population, and we want to make sure that they're doing better.
the only sad part about that is our children and that staff can't wait 18 to 24 months
Yes, ma'am.
for us to do something about it. And I don't think this panel wants to wait 18 to 24 months to make sure that that's taken care of. I mean, I want y'all to do y'all's job. I didn't mean
Right.
it like
Well,
that.
we
But
picked
we
that time
plan on
frame.
doing something
We picked that time frame to give the agency time to make changes and implement our
right,
recommendations.
and I appreciate that.
Right. That we'll have something
And
to review.
Representative Wooten is fixing to jump over the table or something. with that look in his eyes.
That was kind of my
I'm glad
question.
he's
You're
excited.
gonna do a follow-up, and the data that you're tracking for that follow-up, that's kind of what my question was.
What we do in a
What are you
follow-up.
tracking up? What are you tracking between now and then?
In a follow-up, what we
That we
do-
could keep an eye on as well, or staff could help.
We asked the agency what the implementation status is of all of our recommendations, in this case, 101 recommendations, and then we let them respond. And then we look at that to see what we need to do as far as going out to the field and doing some sampling and doing some interviews to make sure that what they're saying, and this is not just DJJ, it's other agencies, that what they're saying has been implemented and is working that way.
Okay, that was my question. How
Yes,
do we
sir.
continue to make sure they're
Yes,
making
sir.
improvements instead of getting 4 years down the road again and going back through the same boat?
Right.
Okay.
You want me to continue? Okay. Chapter 4 talks about medical care and educational services for juveniles. In the medical care section, we said that DJJ is not providing timely and appropriate medical care for juveniles in its custody. One main reason is the lack of transportation for taking juveniles to appointments, taking them to the hospital, things of that nature, because it goes back to security. It takes 2 JCOs to transport a juvenile to an appointment or to the hospital. Lack of security staff, if you have lack of staff, then you might have more problems with fights amongst the youth and all of those types of things. We also note that DJJ could benefit from more intensive mental health training for its staff and its officers, actually. We heard a lot of folks saying that, and I just did a webinar on this 2 days ago, where it was talking about kids in the juvenile justice setting, and it's estimated that nationwide about 70% of juveniles in this type of setting have some sort of diagnosable mental health issue. So like what triggers these kids to get them going and start fighting and things of that nature. We have a lot of tables in this section where it shows different examples of care that was not timely, where kids were not taken to medical appointments, that things were missed routinely. DJJ responded to us that we didn't have the expertise to say that the care was not appropriate or timely. We discussed pretty much all these cases, this was Steve's area, with the nurses and the nurse managers and the psychiatrists who all work for DJJ to get their input to make sure that we were understanding things correctly. And plus, I think a lot of it's common sense. If a kid gets beaten up by 2 or 3 other juveniles and is bleeding, hurt, and you wait hours and hours before you take them for medical care, that's not appropriate. It's not timely. And so we do have a number of examples on page 77 of when a lack of transportation negatively affected medical care. That the first one is a juvenile was assaulted by multiple juveniles, and this is all from documentation maintained by DJJ. I mean, this is from these ERS reports and from their Medicat system, where they put in the medical information. And the doctor for DJJ said the kid needed to go to the emergency room, but there was no staff to transport. And so the kids, it was hours and hours later before the kid was seen or taken for appropriate medical care. There are a lot of issues at, well, I'm getting too much in the weeds, I'm sorry. And we found one case where they had to prioritize surgery for two kids because they couldn't take both of them on the same day. So they had to pick a surgery, which one was the most important to take the child for his or her surgery. Inappropriate medical care on page 80, I think these are rather telling. A juvenile had an allergic reaction, needed an EpiPen, which is a standard thing that you would think that all these secure facilities have. We found out that there was an EpiPen. It was locked in a cart, and the person who had the key had gone home for the day. So
Our House members they have to go in session.
Oh, okay.
And so.
like something's happening over here, and I don't know what it is.
It's not anything you're doing wrong. They have session, and so we're going to let them, we're not going. We're not letting you off this easy.
I'm good.
We're not going, but we're going to let them go because they got some bills. We only got a couple more days of session, and if my bills are on their calendar, I want them off. I want them to pass them. Y'all all remember that? If my bills are on the calendar, would you please pass them? Or anybody else that's in here. Yes. Oh, don't worry. I'm working on all y'all's stuff. So y'all working on all my.
And we're available if y'all have any questions, if you would like to ask us.
But here's the deal. Y'all read all this stuff, because when we get the agency here, that's when the tough questions are going to come, okay? Because we need them to answer this. I mean, the LAC has done their work, and they've given us the information and the stuff to work with. We just have to get the answers that we need to hear. So, because our job is, like I said at the first, I don't know if all of y'all were in here, is to protect the children and the staff at DJJ. You know, everybody's worried about, management. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings either. But there are a lot of children out there, and y'all need to be thinking about them and quit worrying about management. Think about the JCOs, the safety of them, and those children out there. Because that's what I'm worried about. And y'all know how I am. Most people do anyway.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for being here. And we'll be meeting during the off session, if y'all hadn't heard that yet, so. Road trips too. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right. We were just talking
I
about.
like to give speeches and,
Me too.
and get excited and rah stuff and all that.
Well, it's important. We mentioned on page 80, we have a table of inappropriate medical care. I was talking about the EpiPen being locked in the medication cart, and I believe it was a nurse had gone home because she worked on the day shift, so she wasn't there. That seems like a standard thing that should be available because kids have allergic reactions more than just in the daytime. We looked at a number of files and found that some psychiatric counseling had been held in a utility storage room or sitting on the floor in the corner of a common area. The juveniles were not able to receive professional, meaningful counseling in a private, confidential, and neutral environment at that time because there was no security, and it wasn't appropriate. We talked about there are some nursing issues as far as nursing shortages at the agency. We do talk about, they do have some mental health training for their staff, and they were saying that we didn't acknowledge that, but it's in the report. But we feel like there needs to be more intensive training on mental health issues for the folks that are dealing directly with the youth. In getting into educational services, we a lot of people, folks came to us and said, they're not doing GEDs anymore, they're hardly doing any, and things of that nature. So we looked into this and found out that there are fewer students enrolled in the GED track, and they're in the high school diploma and credit earning tracks. And there's a lot you can say about this, and there's studies about this, and that a person earns more money if they have a high school diploma than if they have a GED, and things of that nature. But what we found, what the issues are in this area, is that DJJ doesn't track the educational outcomes of students as they re-enter and engage with the community. So they don't know if they were allowed to go back to their home district. Some of these kids get kicked out of their school and they can't go back, and things of that nature. And that DJJ doesn't have a formal process to review or retain its final grade calculations or credit award decisions. Another good thing about DJJ is that they do ask, in a very short amount of time, like a day and a half, for the kid's educational records from his or her home district. Now, they're having problems getting those records from some of the districts, but that's not DJJ's fault. They do follow up on that to try to get the records in a good time. We did find some issues with the final grade calculations and credits that were awarded. On page 87, we talk about that. DJJ had commented that they do track these kids as they enter back into the community, but we were talking to the agency official responsible for this, and this person was not aware of any tracking of results that DJJ said they were doing. So that might be something to ask the agency, how they do that and who does it, maybe. We did find some, DJJ does admit that its final grade calculations are maintained on paper without organization, and they are found in multiple locations, and so we have some recommendations around that. We found that they awarded, to show you examples of where this is a problem, they awarded half the number of credits needed for graduation in 1 year to some students. This is really not probable. It may be possible, but this kid would have to be going to school all the time and getting an A and turning it around pretty quickly. It's not probable that that would happen. But we also, on the flip side, found that there were 321 instances in our sample where credits were not awarded when they should have been awarded. So that's a problem. Their maintenance of their records and their files needs to improve to make sure that they're tracking these kids appropriately. I think those are the highlights for that chapter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Does DJJ have a program for these individuals as they're released from DJJ to introduce them back into their schools? Have they worked with their local schools or anything like that?
I'm not aware of it. They may. That would be a good question for them.
Okay.
I know that some of the kids, when they're released, they're on parole. Is it parole? I don't know what that was. And so they do still have the ability to track them or to reach out to wherever the kids are going when they leave DJJ. Yes.
And from there's also possibility to track or better understand the outcomes of students on an aggregate level rather than following them individually. There is data that's kept at an aggregate level that could be used to understand better how kids are doing once they leave.
To determine whether or not the GED track and the high school diploma track, which one would be better for those kids that are currently in the custody of DJJ.
My question is about mental health counselors, practitioners. How many does the agency have on site?
I don't know exactly how many, but they have a good number of psychologists, yes.
Okay, but so does the transportation impediment only affect the students or the juveniles when they're having to be transported off site
No, at BRC, it's on the campus,
Okay.
to the infirmary and like that, yeah. But at the coastal, if you're going to a doctor's appointment and at BRC, if you have a outside doctor's appointment, then it would affect that, and it affects going to the emergency room too.
Okay. And I'm trying to remember some of the emails and phone calls I've gotten from constituents who are employed at DJJ. One of the concerns that, that I received is that teachers are not able to teach. And we've talked a lot about the security issues because it's just not safe. And so they end up managing behaviors and dealing with disciplinary issues and disruptions as a result. Is there anything, is the agency doing something to address those issues and concerns?
Not that we're aware of. We observed at one of the evaluation centers, we went to the classroom section of the hallway, and there were about 10 or 12 in each class, and there was one security officer sitting in a chair out in the hall. And I said, well, who's watching that class down the hall? Well, this security officer is watching both. And I said, that's an awful lot of kids if something were to break out, you know? And it is. It's a lack of security. It's a problem.
It's
Yes.
also my understanding that even the JCOs that they have on site sometimes walk past the chaos and the fighting and the disruptions in those classrooms or in the general vicinity. And it is, I guess it's more of an unspoken issue at DJJ, but it's well known among the folks who work there that they do that because it's not safe for them to go into
That's
those
exactly
spaces.
right.
Yeah,
And that's when we're talking about training, and they don't have proper training to handle the aggression of some of these kids, who, if you've been out there, you know that they're not just like these little kids. Now they're even older because of raise the age, but these are big boys, you know. I mean, they have girls there too, but yeah, I mean, it's a problem. It's a problem.
and there's
If
nothing.
you know that nobody, I hate this phrase, has your back, but that's literally what it is. So if you're hearing from your constituents that a JCO may walk by and just act like they don't see anything, because they know that there's nobody who has their back, from what we saw and what we, gleaned from the situation, that's got to be scary.
And the kids end up running the
Right,
facility.
right.
I want to talk about the education part.
Okay.
When I was reading this, I made notes, and I was somewhat pleased when I saw that the GED was down and perhaps classroom time credits were up. But then I started thinking, well, that's also, if you're 19, that's not necessarily a good thing, because we need you to get your GED so that
Right.
when you are able to leave. So do we know the average length of stay for an inmate?
I don't. Did you look at that at all, Ian? This was Ian's area.
I did not look at that in relation to kind of GED versus credit-bearing courses, course load. I know it is something when a student arrives to DJJ, it is something that they look at in terms of the student's age and expected time that they'd stay there. So there are certainly still students getting GEDs sort of even under the old policy that was more GED oriented, there were still students on both sides. It's kind of in the margins in the middle where it's changed quite a bit. So that is a factor that they do look at.
And I'm gonna I hate to jump around on you, but there's a on page 81, you talk about juveniles refusing medical treatment. How does a minor refuse medical treatment that's recommended by a physician? I mean, maybe I
Well-
don't understand the process out there, but
This was Steve's area, and Steve, if you want to address that.
Yeah, well, sometimes these kids will get into fights, and it may not be a bad fight. I mean, they may have punched the guy in the nose, or the girl may have punched another girl. Can you hear me now? Yeah? Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Sometimes these kids will get into fights, males or females, and it's minor. I mean, nothing major. And so the JCO, from what I read through the event report, would say, we want to take you to the infirmary. And then the kid's like, no, I don't want to go. I'm fine. And then they explained to the child the repercussions, and there's a form they can sign, the refusal medical form, and it's supposed to be signed with a medical person there at that moment. And sometimes, they'll sign it, but it's important that they sign it, because if this child tells his guardian, his parent, later during visitation, like, I got in a fight with John, he punched me in the nose, and then I didn't go to the infirmary, they get up, the
You hear
parent,
from the parent.
yeah, parent, the guardian get furious, like, why didn't you take my kid to the infirmary? Well, because, Steve didn't want to go. And
I get that part, but when I read DJJ's response, they infer that the reason they're not providing medical care, they're not, and they literally say, youth medical appointments are not routinely missed. I mean, they say that in the response, and then they infer that, well, the reason these kids aren't getting medical care is because they're declining medical care. And I understand it if I'm in a simple, you hit me in the face and I don't want to get medical care for that, that's one thing. But children who need to be taken off site for medical care, what your report says is they're not getting it. Yet again, DJJ says they call your report questionable about how you could come to these conclusions. They said that you do not have the knowledge of a medical professional in order to make these conclusions.
That's why we consulted with the medical professionals that work there.
And so it was the opinion of the medical professionals who work at DJJ that's documented in your report that these children are not receiving adequate medical care in a timely manner.
correct, yes.
I don't know, do we know how often this happens where they refuse treatment? It's not that they're normally refusing treatment to
Yeah.
go to the dentist or something. It's usually because there's a fight. They think they might get in trouble. Snitches get stitches, all that kind of stuff. Because I know that happens with whether or not it's reported for them to investigate it criminally and all of that. They'll say, well, if you say that this happened, then we're going to press charges on you too, and which is, that's all within the agency's realm, I guess, to do. But I think we only found one refusal note that was in all of the files that we reviewed.
That's
So
right.
of all the files we reviewed, there was only one refusal note. So all the other ones were not because they refused to go. All the other lack of treatment where they didn't go to see the doctor was not because of this form.
Lack of transportation and lack of staffing.
Right.
And lack of transportation is because they're pulling people off the transportation to handle security staff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about the information that is given to teachers and staff members who are on the front lines with these kids. I think I was told by the director previously that they are not allowed to give information about the offenses, maybe that the students, that the kids are
And therefore,
are there for. But it would seem that, given the obvious safety concerns and the mental health issues that seem to be very prevalent throughout the agency, that they would be given, those on the front lines would be given some level of intel or information about what these kids are struggling with. For instance, if you have a teacher or a staff member or a JCO who is dealing with a juvenile regularly within their scope, would it not be practical and helpful for them to at least be aware of some of the things that they could do or not do that would negatively impact those students or cause them to have a negative reaction or trigger them in a way that I just can't imagine being in close proximity to a young person or an older person who has a documented mental health issue, and I'm dealing with that student or that kid on a regular basis, and I have no idea if what I'm saying is going to trigger them, if what I'm teaching is going to trigger them, if what I'm doing is going to trigger them in a negative way. And the other question I have, or concern I have, is that we're talking about fights when it comes to the students declining, medical help, but what about the students who decline medical medications? I'm sorry, not medical treatment, but medications after they have been seen. There seems to be not a whole lot of accountability for the kids who are housed at DJJ, and not a whole lot of information or communication for those who are on the front lines dealing with those kids. So
I think that those are all good concerns to bring up with the agency of why they do or do not share information. We do definitely have in the report that we think that folks need more intensive training on how to deal with folks with mental health issues across the board. We were primarily focused in on the JCOs because, of course, the nurses know and the psychologists know and stuff like that. But other folks that come into daily contact with these kids every day, they should know. And the triggers is a big word that we heard from a lot of different folks and professionals where they said, you need to know what triggers this person. So you won't put yourself in harm's way because you know that the closest JCO is at the end of the hall down there with 10 other kids. So, those are all good concerns I would think that I would want to know if I were working on a daily basis with these kids. So that's a good question for the agency to respond to.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, Lord, I'm getting a note. Yeah. Okay. Ian was just mentioning that the school records that come in for the youth that are coming to, like the evaluation centers, are supposed to include the IEPs, the individual educational plans for these kids. And if they have these issues, those types of things should be in that information. But sometimes they don't get that from the other school districts for a while. That's what we talk about in the report. That DJJ commented that they were having some problems getting the records from the juveniles' home districts. It is, yes, sir.
It depends on the school district.
Some are good and
Some are good, some are bad. But in general, from our review of data that DJJ kept, on average, they were coming in over the time limit to provide information.
That's a whole different audit. There are time frames set out in regulation. Yes, sir. Chapter 5 is about staff training. I'm not going to get into grand detail because I think we have some good bulleted information at the beginning of each of the findings, but we did find that these JCOs have not been properly trained, or they have not received their recertification training as required, and in some cases by state law. We do have information about the folks that work at the Juvenile Detention Center. They're a different type of JCO. They have to go to the Criminal Justice Academy within the first year of their employment, and we found that 63% did not complete this training within the first year. It was just a notion on my part, because we looked at this last time and found that there was a low number of juvenile detention, JDC, JCOs, that's hard to say, who were not properly trained. I think it was around 28% or something last time. And I wondered if any of the officers who were not trained last time had not gone through the CJA training, and at the time of our review, we found one who still had not since our January 2017 audit was published. We talk about this handle with care behavioral management training a good bit. In our survey, 74% of the correctional officers says that it's not sufficient training to de-escalate these juveniles when they're getting in fights and things. That was the JDC training. The JCO, the regular JCO training, these officers are not completing their recertification classes as required. And they, let me see, 57% said that they feel unsafe at work. And we talk a little bit about closing one of the evaluation centers because of lack of staff. And DJJ said that some of the things that we said in the report that we observed when we went to our on-site visits did not happen, yet they did, because we saw them and we documented them at the time. And we met with one facility administrator during a site visit who had to stay in the control room where all the screens are, and they pop the locks in the different places and stuff. We had to conduct the interview with her because she was low on staff, on security staff. Usually there's 1 or 2 JCOs in the control room to make it a sufficient coverage for that control room, and we had to talk to her basically in the dark because they have to keep the lights dim so you can see the screens properly. And she was, having to step in for security because they didn't have sufficient security. That did happen. We did speak to the director about Handle with Care and about the current program's adequacy to properly be able to address these juveniles when they get into a fight. On page 95, he mentioned that he was looking into something called Handle with Care Plus, which would include more pressure point control techniques and tactics, different things that the officers would be able to use that they're not supposed to use now. That's another concern, that the JCOs say that when they do step in to break up a fight, they can only do certain things, of course, for safety reasons, because these are juveniles, but then they end up getting hurt because they're trying to break up fights that are going on because they don't have the proper techniques, perhaps, to bring someone into submission or under control, whatever the proper term is for that.
I'm going to ask a question. I know I'm not supposed to ask till you get through, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Breaking your own rule.
Yeah, I'm breaking my own rule. I'm sorry. Do you know what the percentage of male to female JCOs there are?
I don't think we have that in the
Okay,
report.
because I know there's a good many female
Yes,
JCOs.
ma'am. We saw a good number of female
And I know that
JCOs.
I've been out there, and I know that there's a lot of those female JCOs are a lot smaller than the people they're trying to control. So, I mean, they probably need something besides, raise your hand, like they make third graders do, so you'll be quiet to control
Stand in
them.
line by height. I didn't know they did that.
I don't think that works.
Yeah.
in
So we can
juvenile
see your
prison.
face. Yeah.
Right, I don't think that works, but, they probably do that. I'm curious about that number, so we're going to see if we can find that out. Thank you.
So the director had said that had discussed this in early 2020, but that DJJ's legal and training divisions raised concerns about adding additional pressure point tactics. And so it pretty much dropped from there as far as what has happened that we are aware of. It's funny that people in the evaluation centers were saying that nobody comes out to them, the coastal and upstate ones, to hold training. And they have to come to Columbia for training for a lot of instances. And what we found, though, that the highest percentage of non-compliance for security officers training were those officers at MEC, which is the Midlands Evaluation Center, and BRRC, which are right there in Columbia. So not to be left out, we looked at training for non-security staff as well, when they are supposed to have 15 hours of minimum annual training requirements by policy. Found that 36% of the employees failed to meet that. The more important number on page 97 of these bullets is the 13% of the employees in our sample had not completed the Prison Rape Elimination Act training that's required by federal law, and you're supposed to complete that every 2 years. And so that's a federal requirement, so it has a little bit more gravity than the others. Ethics training, it was recommended by the state's Office of Inspector General that all the staff can complete that training, and we found that 27% of the staff had failed to complete that training. It's a 33-minute video online. I completed it. I think other members of my team completed it because we just wanted to see what it involved. So it shouldn't be that difficult to complete. That's all about staff training.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, okay. So my first question is about the level of gang activity at DJJ. I'm aware that it's pretty high. Does the report address that at all?
Yes, ma'am, we do. What page is our information about? They have gang interventionist, but they had not followed some national standards that are put out by the Department of Justice, had not implemented certain models, and page 23.
Okay, thank you. And despite the fact that, gang activity is high at DJJ and security there's not enough security to protect the staff at DJJ or the officers at DJJ, and I think there is a really high number of injuries, and the severity of those injuries, ranges, of course, but the number is high nonetheless. So it's my understanding that the agency implemented a policy that required staffers to not have their cell phones with them in their respective facilities. If that is the case, does that not put them more at risk of being hurt and not being able to communicate with anyone who could help?
That is not anything that's in our report specifically, but we heard the same things. So that's another question for the agency. I think that what that concern probably was of DJJ's, and I don't want to speak for them at all, and maybe I should just hush, but with the cell phones, that's contraband, of course, for the juveniles, and that you have cases where, and y'all have seen them on the news, videos, and it's not by staffers sometimes, but by juveniles, putting the videos out of destruction and things going on at the different facilities, and so maybe that was to curb that. I don't know, but that would be a question for
I
the
get that,
for the agency.
but
For safety
considering
purposes, right.
considering everything else that I've heard and read and seen,
Do they have?
I can't imagine going into a facility and not having a
In the community. or in the secure, I'm sorry.
That's
I'm trying to find out more information
That's
for you.
okay, and not having, a cell phone or something that will allow me to communicate if I am.
Need help.
Yeah, if I'm attacked, if I'm in trouble.
Right.
And that would be especially true, I would think, for female staffers as well. So I will address that with the agency when we have that opportunity.
Yes, ma'am.
We did observe radios, but I think
They
there's
have-
limited staff that have access to any type of telephone type advice or device inside the secure facilities.
I was thinking about the folks in the community, because I think that they did give them some upgraded telephones in the community since our last audit,
But not behind the fence.
but not behind the fence that I'm aware of, or that we're aware of.
Madam Chair, quick question.
Senator Johnson.
You all say that 63% of all the officers have not graduated from the CJA
Within that first year
within the
is
first year.
required.
They say that number's 28% in their response. They also said that of the they only said that 28% had not. But then one of the things they blamed as the reason for that was COVID. Your report ends pre-COVID, correct? Your audit, the numbers you used, you didn't use post-COVID because it would skew the numbers.
Right. Some of our sampling, and that was one of them, I think. Yes, sir. And, we corroborate information with the Criminal Justice Academy itself. So we have documentation from Criminal Justice Academy and DJJ, and that is our evidence of who did and did not attend.
You also cite that the Criminal Justice Academy reserves 2 spots
Right.
for DJJ, and that those spots were not always
Filled.
filled.
Correct.
Do you have, and I say the reference, but do you have any specific numbers that you can give us that show what spots weren't filled and when, so we can see that?
Do we have that? It's not in the report, but do we have that in our evidence?
Yes, I think we do have data that could be
I'd like to see that data. I
reviewed to
think
show
it's
that.
hard for you to argue that you can't get
I can't
people
hear you.
into classes when you have 2 empty seats sitting in a class. So I'd like to just see that.
I think that we've got about, I'd say 5 minutes left. Banking and insurance has to come in here when we get through.
Okay.
But I think that once we get the staff and from the department here, and they have to answer these questions under oath, I think we're going to get, and everybody's going to be under oath, so hopefully we'll get the right answers. And we'll see how it matches up then, so it should be interesting. And I think, and I did say this before, but I'm going to say it again, Lisa's going to set us up some trips. Hope y'all are up for road trips. I like road trips. Since we've had COVID, we haven't been able to take many road trips. Things are calming down. I like road trips. So, we'll kind of just wrap it up here. And I think most of us have read everything here. And if right here, I think it'd be a good place if anybody's got any throbbing, burning questions y'all need to ask before we go.
I can't wait to hear that.
That you just can't get off your mind that you've been wanting to ask, because we need to kind of let Lisa and Mason clean up before banking and insurance come in. So does anybody have anything that they just got to ask? I think, Senator, you don't have a question? You got something you got to say.
I've got a lot of questions, but I think it's going to be
More towards it, yeah. And y'all done a great job. I couldn't,
very much.
couldn't ask for anything more.
We had a great team, and I appreciate everybody's hard
Yeah,
work.
we
and
appreciate all of you.
We're always
you've all
glad
done a
when
great.
people are interested in our reports.
Yeah, well, I'm always interested. I love LAC reports. It's the best part of my job.
So when the director is here, will LAC be here as well?
Y'all have somebody here in case we have to refer back to you. Yes.
Sure.
And we'll plan that meeting and give them plenty of notice, no excuse noticing. So, Senator Johnson, Senator McLeod, y'all have any other questions? Lisa, do you have anything you'd like to say before we go? Mason, you got anything you want to throw in? No? Do y'all have anything else y'all would like to say?
We appreciate your time, and I'll just remind you that everything we have is documented fully, so.
And we appreciate that, and we appreciate everybody else that sat out there the entire time and listened. And thank y'all for coming, and we will see you at the next appointed event. If we have nothing further, we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you so much.